suddenly I go very quiet, then please do just wave your hands furiously, and I'll try and speak louder or do whatever I can do so you can hear me. Anyway, I'm joined this morning by Harriet Brooks, who's one of our grants managers. I'm Flora Craig, I'm the Deputy Director at the Foundation. And the purpose of this talk this morning is to really take you through the application process, explain a little bit about the Foundation, and hopefully for those who maybe don't know very much about us or have been thinking about applying, to help encourage you to think about making an application if you're eligible to do so. I know that there's lots of people on this call who actually have already been successful with grants from us or maybe have applied before. So if you suddenly decide that actually this isn't really for you because you know it all already, then we won't be at all offended if you decide to leave and spend your time writing a fundraising application for something else. So, that's absolutely fine, because this is, I suppose, intended to be for those who don't really know much about us and also maybe have never applied before. So I will be going over the sort of basics of applying to the Foundation. Anyway, I mean, before we get started, I just, it's always, really lovely to be able to meet you all. I mean, obviously online, not in person, which is the way things are these days, but, also to say a massive thank you to all of you for all the work that you do in the voluntary sector, because I think our trustees are always full of admiration and appreciation for everything that you all do to help the people that you serve and the people whose lives you make better. So I know this has been a very difficult few years for lots of voluntary sector organisations, but a real thank you and real tribute to all of you for the hard work you do and the difference that you make. So if I could have the slide deck up, please. I'll make sure that everyone can see that before I get started. Hopefully everyone can see that. And if I could have the first slide, please. So if we can move on one from here. Lovely, thank you. Before we get started into the sort of how to apply and what to do next, I thought it'd be just helpful to give you a little bit of background about the Foundation, because actually not everyone knows about the Garfield Weston Foundation or how it came into existence. So we are a family foundation. The family is the Weston family, and the Foundation was established in 1958 by Garfield Weston himself, who was a successful businessman. He started life in Canada, moved his family and his business over to this country and established a very successful business empire from here. And from that successful business, he decided to bequeath shares in the family investment company to the Foundation. And it's that money that comes from those businesses that allows us to do the good that we can do. So some of the businesses that are part of the Whittington Investments Group are names that will be familiar to you: Fortnum and Masons, Associated British Foods, which makes lots of really things that will be in your kitchen cupboards: Kingsmill Bread, Twinings Tea. It also owns the fashion retailer Primark as well. So lots of ordinary down-to-earth things which are sold and used by lots of you across the country, help to generate the income that we then have to be able to give to good causes across the whole of the UK. So we're one of the largest foundations, in that we are able to be in a position, because of the success of the family businesses, to be able to give around £90 million a year away. I think last year it was about £98 million over the very difficult COVID years. We tried to do as much as we could where there was need, and there certainly was a lot of need out there. So over the last 60 years, we've given well over £1 billion, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we do that and the kind of size and scale of those grants. But I think one of the important things to note about the Foundation, which makes it very special, is it is a family foundation. So all the trustees are direct lineal descendants of the founder. So it is the Weston family that are the trustees. It is them that are very hands-on and experienced in philanthropy, and they make all the decisions. So we're different, all foundations are differently set up, but that's the way that we operate, and has obviously been very successful in supporting charities across the UK. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the purpose of today is really to talk about what you need to know in order to be able to put together hopefully a really compelling, strong application. And obviously the first thing in any funders talk, and I'm sure you've been to lots of them before, is your eligibility. So in order to apply to us, you need to be a UK registered charity or a CIO to apply. We also allow organisations that fall under exempt or accepted guidance from the Charity Commission. So there are certain organisations that don't need to be registered charities, but they are considered to be exempt or accepted by the Charity Commission. Now, in order to be able to, I just see that I'm frozen on the screen, so I'm hoping that you can all still hear me. We're not able to fund CICs. That's a question we quite often get asked. But CICs are my screen has gone completely blank, so I'm not even
You're
sure.
okay, Flora. I can still hear you.
Really?
Yeah, I can still
well,
hear
that's
you.
Good, because I've gone my screen's completely blank. I can't see you or the slide or anything. So let me just see, if you just bear with me a second. I'm just going to see if my computer can just bring up the slides again. Right, I think we're obviously just having a little glitch where I am. Good. Okay, you're all still there. I'm the one who's not. Right, so we were talking about eligibility. So basically we look to the Charity Commission for guidance, and if you are registered or exempted by the Charity Commission, you're able to apply to us. We fund across the whole of the UK, so we're able to fund from every corner of across the UK, and we're always really interested to get applications from different parts of the country where we perhaps haven't funded before, either because we haven't had lots of applications, or maybe there isn't a lot of charitable work going on there. So don't be afraid if you're not sort of a big national organisation or a well-known name, but you're doing very, very good local work in a small area. We are interested to hear from you, so please do consider applying to us. I think people feel that they're, because they do something very local, that won't be of interest to us, but it definitely is. I think Alex said we fund across a broad range of categories. They're listed up on the screen now. We are a very broad funder. The important thing to note about categories is we don't have predetermined funds by category or by region. So we don't sit down at the beginning of the year and think about our expenditure and say, well, we're going to give X amount to this area or this amount to this type of category. So when you apply to us, you're asked to tick a category to say which one represents your organisation the best. So just choose the one you think suits you the best. We know there's some overlap. Don't worry too much. It doesn't disadvantage you to choose youth over welfare. It doesn't, advantage you to choose arts over something else, because we don't have set pots. We look at every application on its own merit. And really the categories are to help us make sure that we are screening and checking that funding is going out in a wide range of ways, in the way that the trustees would like it to. So really for us, it's more of an opportunity for us to check we're doing a good job and spreading our money as widely as possible. So don't worry too much about which category you choose. There are certain things that we don't do, so it's probably best to tell you that what they are now. We don't fund animal welfare charities. We don't fund individual posts or individuals that apply to us, and occasionally individuals apply to us. We don't fund sort of named salary posts. We don't fund projects outside of the UK, even if that charity is registered in the UK. And we really don't tend to fund anything that would fall under the category of being a sort of an event, a one-off time-limited activity or festival. And we tend to not fund work that prioritizes campaigning or lobbying work on its own. Sometimes some of those things fall into a broader request. An organisation might do some of that work, but they're coming to us for something slightly different. So it doesn't mean you're completely discounted unless that is your sole purpose, in which case it's very unlikely you'll be successful with us. So if I could have the next slide, please. Right, types of grants. So we try and keep it as straightforward as possible, and we sort of hope that those who've been successful with us will find us transparent and easy to work with, and don't have too many complicated sort of steps that you have to go through. We have two grant programs, essentially what we call our regular grants, which is for grants of up to £100,000 and represents really the majority of our grant making. And then also our major grants, which is for grants of over £100,000. Now, just to touch very briefly on the major grants, I'm not going to talk about them in detail today. Those are handled separately. The expectation is for those organisations who want a major grant, your turnover needs to be well over £1 million. The project you might want to apply for probably needs to be over £1 million. They're sort of substantial projects or activities that you want to come to apply to us for. So we handle those entirely separately, and what we ask you to do if you think you're in the major grant territory is write us a brief one-pager to describe what it is you're doing, the timescales, the costs, the fundraising you've got under your belt. And then we'll give you bespoke advice about whether we think you should apply for a major grant, when we think you should apply for a major grant, how much we think you should apply for. So those are handled completely separately from our normal regular grant making. But it's the regular grant making I'm going to really focus on today, because that really represents about over 90% of our applications. So the majority of our grant making is in small, really great organisations that we're able to kind of to help. So within those regular grants, we are happy to look at applications for a whole range of different things. And those are listed here, but we will look at your unrestricted funding. So, you might call it core costs, you might call it your revenue costs, money that you might need just to be able to run your organisation really well. And particularly for smaller organisations, I think trustees are very aware that, particularly given things like energy bills right now and cost of living, that sometimes just some funding to keep the doors open, to keep if it's a youth club, keep the kids coming, is really, really important. So we're very happy to give you that kind of support if that's what you need. If you've got a particular project that you're looking at, say you want to start a new initiative, you want to develop a new audience for your work, then you can also apply for project funding, and you can describe what that is and how you think that's going to make a difference. And we also do capital funding. So capital funding for us is, bricks and mortar, building projects. It could be buying a van so you can deliver hot meals. It's, anything that you need to purchase in order to be able to do your work really well. In terms of the kind of, for capital funding in particular, if it's a building type project, you'd need to have all your planning permission in place, and you'd also need about 50% of your funding before you approach us. And we're unlikely to look at more than about 10% of the total capital cost, to be able to support you with. Whenever I give out percentages, I am always worried that people will take that as a very sort of scientific number, as I'm sure you can imagine, given the kind of breadth of grants that we give, that figure can be incredibly variable. So, that's a rough estimate in terms of the types of sort of size of grants that you might get. We also fund and make multi-year grants. So if you feel, and we know that for a lot of organisations, multi-year funding helps to give them some financial security, you're very welcome to ask us about a multi-year grant. We tend to give those to organisations that we have given at least a grant to in the past. So we have some knowledge of them, we've seen their reporting, we know how they work. So if you're a first-time applicant, you're very welcome to ask for a multi-year grant, but it may be that trustees make a decision to just support 1 year in the first instance, and that 1 year, just so that they can see how you work and what kind of work you do. You're very welcome to come back after that grant period is finished in any case, so it doesn't hopefully disadvantage you too much. If you just get 1 year, you might come back the following year and ask for a multi-year and be successful another time. I think I started by saying that we don't fund specific posts, so sort of named salary posts. And we totally understand that obviously salaries can be part of your core costs. That's not a problem. But the named salary post bit is really that if you, for example, wanted to apply for your operations manager post and you were successful, and then the next year you came back and said, oh, well, we need the money again to be able to continue to employ this particular person, and the trustees didn't want to fund you, they wouldn't want to be responsible for the employment of a single individual in your organisation for very obvious reasons, because they can't guarantee they're always going to be able to fund you. But, if you come to us with an unrestricted core cost application, of course, they expect salaries to be part of that. We know you need good people to be able to run your organisations. So absolutely, you know, include those in your costings. So next slide, please. If we could just talk about the process and timeline. I'm sure if you're a funders group, so you've probably been to lots of these types of talks, and I'm sure everyone says to you, please read the guidelines. I know it sounds very obvious, but we do spend a lot of time really trying to make our guidelines as straightforward as possible and accessible for the widest range of people. You know, if you've never ever applied for money before, we hope that our guidelines are simple enough for you to be able to follow them and potentially be successful in a grant. Lots of us who work at the team are former fundraisers, so we know it's difficult. We have huge respect for you who are asking for money, and we also know, you know, what kind of help you need in order to be able to put together a good application. So make sure you're really familiar with the guidelines. It's interesting how there are people who obviously decide to apply, they decide perhaps not to read the guidelines, and those applications do tend to not have the information that we need in order to be able to make a positive decision. So, you know, the guidelines are there for a reason. You know, you don't have to follow them slavishly, but they are helpful if you're putting together a proposal for the first time. So you can be confident that you put everything in that we need to see. So I think I said before that, you know, majority of our grant making is in these regular grants. The majority of our grant making is now done online. So I think 95% of our grants are with you applying online, but we still give the opportunity to you to apply in the post if you would prefer to. And we know for some, particularly volunteer fundraisers who perhaps aren't familiar with fundraising, applying online still feels quite daunting. So you can apply in the post as well. The one thing we ask you not to do is please don't apply online and then send us a hard copy in the post, because it confuses the system somewhat when we end up with two identical applications coming from different directions. So just choose one. The good thing about applying online is the minute you press submit, you'll get an email to say that we've got your application safely. So you know, you can be confident that it's in safe hands and we will look after it for you. So we don't have any deadlines to worry about. So you can apply when it suits you at any point during the year. The important thing to note, though, when you're thinking about your sort of fundraising strategy, is you can only apply for one application at a time. So only one either live grant, or if you're sadly turned down, you have to wait 12 months before you can apply again. So don't think about the thing that you need the most. We always say, please come and tell us about the thing you need the most, even if that's just core costs. And the reason I say one application at a time is sometimes we get people coming to us for core costs. They're successful with maybe a small grant towards core costs, and then during that grant period come back and say, oh, but now we need our roof fixed. Can we come for a capital grant? You have to wait until your grant period's ended. So really think ahead. What would be the thing you really need to apply for? What would be the best time to make that application? Once we've received the application, and we allow you, and you'll see in our guidelines, we allow you to write a proposal in your own words. We don't have a form to fill in as such. We allow you up to 10 sides to describe the work that you do. You don't need to use the whole 10 sides. If your application is pretty straightforward, you can use 5 if you want, but 10 sides is the maximum we think that you need to tell us what you do in. And that applies whether you're a tiny organization or a huge organization. We try and keep it really succinct, because I think that's the way to really tell the trustees a clear story about what you do. So once we've got the application, we review it. So Harriet, who's here today, is one of our grants managers. She and I and other members of the team will review our application. We'll come back to ask you questions. We might want to have a call or a visit. And then we will then talk to the trustees about it. We'll make recommendations and talk to the trustees. But all applications are read by trustees, seen by trustees, and they make the final decision. So, please be assured that there isn't a kind of step along the way where we decide that we're not going to take it any further forward. Everything will go absolutely to the end point, whether the outcome is good or bad for you. I mean, you can be reassured to know that it's not one single person who's making that decision. We also look at all the applications in order of receipt. So one thing to really think about thinking strategically is, it's difficult for us to respond to urgent requests. Clearly, everyone's finding things very difficult at the moment. It's difficult to budget, difficult to know what your financial position might be. But please do try and think ahead, because if you come to us with an application that's, that either is funding has already been spent and you want retrospective funding, or you haven't quite, you need an immediate response. We just may not be able to do that. And that's partly because we want to be fair to everyone. And there's lots of people, obviously, who want our funding, and they've been organised enough to come to us in good time to ask for it. It takes up to about 3 to 4 months to get a decision. So, bear that in mind when you apply. I always think it's good to be thinking about putting in an application, thinking about the money coming into you within a sort of 6 months ahead. So you're thinking about, if it's a project, you're not going to start it probably for at least 6 months when you submit to us, which gives you time to get the decision, get your project sort of set up, and then you can obviously decide, if you've been successful to go ahead. Eligibility changes in terms of essentially you can't reapply for a minimum of 12 months. So if you just come for a normal regular grant, whether successful or not, you're going to have to wait 12 months. If, of course, you have a multi-year grant, you will have to wait till that whole multi-year grant has completed. So that could be 2 or 3 years hence before you can reapply. And if it's a capital project, obviously you need to finish that project before you can come back. So again, that the period of time will be a minimum of 12 months, but it could be 2 or 3 years, depending on how long it takes for you to do your project. Right, if I could have the next slide, please. The next couple of slides, I'm just going to talk about a little bit about some top tips for making a good application. And then a few things that we see which are slight pitfalls in some people's applications. But really, I think the important thing for us is that, we're giving you the space to write your own proposal. We want you to keep it focused, but we want you to tell us a really good, something that stacks up financially, makes really good sense, but also is a really compelling read. I think we always say we make our assessments using our head and our heart. So if you've got fantastic case studies or stories to tell us about the people who benefit from your work, then please do put them in, make it as lively as you can do, so that when it's read, the trustees immediately get a sense of, who you are, what you do, why you do it, when you do it, what the benefits are going to be, how your work's really important. So you really use that 10 pages to bring your work to life. And as I said, case studies and pictures are really helpful. We often get applications where I think because people want to tell us everything, they fall into the trap of reducing the font size to size 8, reducing the margins so they're tiny, putting in no pictures. It's just a wall of text. I mean, when you look at it, if you think it's difficult to read, then please bear in mind, if you're finding it difficult to read, we will also find it difficult to read. And we do read a lot of applications. So remember, your end reader needs to sort of find pleasure in the experience of, finding out about what you do, understanding how important it is, and hopefully making a positive decision. Obviously, when you apply to us, you're going to need to put in some really clear budgets. We really, it's really worth spending time getting those right so that they're really clear to you and to us. Broadly, what we're looking for are organisations that have a clear income and expenditure plan. It's clear how the money is spent. It's, anything that is unusual is explained. I suppose overall, we're looking for a sense that this is a well-run organisation that has good finances behind it. So, make sure that you made it as clear as possible. We don't need tiny, infinite degrees of information in terms of, X number of bits of stationery or any of that. We want the kind of headline stuff that you would normally put in your accounts. So make them really clear. If you're applying for a specific capital project or a project budget, it's good to show us your organisational income and expenditure, and then those specific budgets, just so that we can see your work in context. Because sometimes an organisation might have a tiny income and expenditure, but a very big capital project. It's just useful for us to understand that context. A realistic funding plan is really important. So, I mean, when I say funding, I think it needs to be an income plan in the broadest sense. So I suppose what we're looking for there is you really thinking about all the different sources of income that you have access to. And it could be that you hire out your space. It could be that you run coffee mornings. It could be that, you have another charity living in your building. It can be any type of income, but the important thing is you give us a sense of how much of that is really confirmed or likely, so that we, and then how much you're looking to raise. So again, when you put in your income plan, put some narrative alongside of things you're totally confident of, because every year you get £10,000 through this source, and things that perhaps you're less confident of, but you're going out there trying to find money from other places. So make it as clear as possible. And again, what we're looking for is an organisation that has really thought about their income, is able to weather the storms, and we've had a few of those along the way in the last couple of years. A really diverse pot of money that can be used in different ways if and when you need it. When you're talking to us about your work, really make sure as well you tell us about your local fundraising. So it may not be that you raise loads of money locally, but I think what trustees really like to see is an organisation that's clearly really valued locally. So it could be that you do a coffee morning, it could be that you do a sponsored walk, it could be all sorts of things. But I think that local fundraising just demonstrates to trustees that it's not just a national funder like us who are going to support you, but actually there are people on the ground helping you in lots of different ways be successful. So tell us about that. Even if it's tiny amounts of money, it's always really useful to know. When you come to us, we like you to have some funds already raised towards your target. So we don't fund projects in their entirety or work in its entirety. It's good to have some sort of money under your belt already, so you're not coming to us saying, this is what we want to do, this is what it's going to cost, can we have some funding please? We want to get a sense that even if we did say no, or sometimes the trustees don't want to give at the level you might have asked at, they want to give you something towards it. They want to be confident that if they only give you a contribution towards your project, you've got the confidence that you know where else that funding is coming from. So I think that's really important as well. When you've got your application or your proposal written, I always think it's really helpful to get somebody, it could be somebody in this group if you're a group that meet regularly, just to have a read through of your proposal. I think we're all really bad at blowing our own trumpet and celebrating the things we do. And I think also sometimes we're not always the best, because lots of people get involved in the editing of an application, in taking that step back and go, okay, does this really make sense? Is it really clear from the beginning to end what we do, why we need this money, and the difference we're going to make? So if you get somebody who sort of knows your organisation to read it, they'll probably point out to you quite quickly if you've missed a trick or not quite given the kind of information that would really sell your organisation. So, without being overly sales pitchy, be really positive and upbeat about what it is you do. So can I have the next slide, please? These are some things that we see that perhaps aren't so good to put in your application, just to bear in mind. We all do it. We call amongst us as funders, we tend to talk in sometimes jargon, acronyms, sort of slight business shortcuts. Be really mindful that if, you may get statutory funding that requires a sort of different language set to perhaps, the way that we sometimes speak. Be as plain English as possible. Of course, if you want to use acronyms, that's absolutely fine, but make sure that they're explained to us. Don't put in things where we actually don't know what they mean and have to look them up, because that means that we're probably losing confidence that we're not really understanding. The important thing to remember is we consider you to be the experts in what you do. So it's your job to really tell us about why your work's important and the difference you're going to make. Because we're a very broad funder, which I think is a fantastic thing, we don't sort of sit, in judgment and thinking about whether you're doing the right thing or not, because you're the expert. You're there to tell us what it is you do and why you know that work is really important. So always bear that in mind. And plain English is really helpful, just that you're taking us through the story really clearly. Fundraising, we've touched on, quite often we get fundraising plans that just aren't really clear. It's difficult to tell, well, how much of this is actually secure, how much of this is, really unknown, are these really realistic figures that have been put in here? So make sure that they're really as clear as possible. Our guidance has some examples of what a fund, both income and expenditure budgets should look like, what funding budgets should look like. So really use those as the kind of starting point to fill in the gaps of your particular organisation. We always ask you when you apply to submit your latest set of accounts, It's really important you submit those because they're part of our due diligence checks. We have to check your accounts before we can make any formal recommendation about funding. And the thing about accounts that's really important is if there's anything really unusual in them, and it could be that you've been operating at a planned deficit, it could have been that you've just got a really large legacy, then if there's anything that you think, well, that sort of stands out, it looks very different from the previous year's accounts, then make sure that you've made a note of it in your proposal to us in the finance section. It's really helpful to explain that stuff because you don't want us jumping to conclusions, reading your application and looking at your accounts thinking, this looks really different from how they presented their application. And it could be, an example could be that you've grown a lot and your previous set of accounts are much, much smaller financially than your proposed budgets in your application. Explain that there's growth there. Otherwise, we'll look at it and think, well, this seems very ambitious for an organization that, previously had accounts that were much lower. So just, help us, take us along that journey so that we understand what you want us to understand. Again, we talked a little bit about budgets. I should always talk about budgets because budgets are really important to get, nice and clear. And one thing that we find with budgets is that sometimes people give us lots and lots of detail, but don't actually total their budgets. Make sure they're totaled, make sure they add up, and also make sure that the figures are consistent throughout the whole document. We often get applications where people will say, oh, we'd like to apply for £10,000. And then somewhere in the narrative of the application, they might say, oh, it's £7,500. And then we look at the budget and it's neither of those figures. So make sure, again, when your critical friend looks at your application, they're checking, are you being consistent in your request? Is it clear what it is you really need? So budgets are super important as well. Again, clarity of what you do is really important. If you've been funded before by us, it's really important to restart from the beginning. You don't have to go back to, your first day of operation, but reset the scene for us. Just because we funded you, excuse me, before, doesn't mean that we'll necessarily remember everything you do. So always do that sort of executive summary introduction, which would be super helpful. And then, excuse me, if we have any questions, we will come back and ask you for information. If we do that, I know you're super busy, but please respond as soon as you can, because the reason we're asking you for more information is because we don't think we've got quite enough to make a good decision. And I know that sometimes those emails, when we ask for more, sometimes fall to the bottom of the inbox. People don't respond. It's not possible for us to, continually chase people. So please treat it seriously if we ask you for a question, because we are trying to help you get your application into the best possible place to get a good result. So I think I'm finishing up pretty much there. I mean, I think go back to the guidelines, they're the most important thing. I can see there's lots of questions in the chat, so I'm going to stop talking, have a sip of water, and then you can fire some questions at me if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Flora. Harriet, are you ready to open up the floor for questions? Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you for everyone's questions that they popped into the chat box. So I think we'll just go through some of those and then we can open up the floor to further questions, if that's all right. So I just wanted clarification around the reapplying, when exactly the 12 months starts.
So in terms of when you have had your decision letter, whether that's a decision to give you a grant or not, is 12 months from the date of that letter. So if you're unfortunately declined, you'll get your letter, let's say the 1st of November, saying, I'm sorry, we're not able to support you this time. It's 12 months from then before you can reapply. But of course, if you do get a grant and that grant period is for longer than 12 months, then it will be whatever that period is. So it's multi-year, then it will be, a number of years before you can next apply.
Yeah, so 12 months sort of on receipt and then 12 months again. Yeah, okay. So Crispin, timeline for the funds to be spent. So Flora, do you want to just clarify that?
Well, that completely depends on what you're applying for.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't specify that. What we ask you to do is when you come to ask us, If it's just a general regular core cost grant, we would expect it to be spent in the next 12 months on your activities. If you're looking for a period a little bit further into the future, then of course, if you tell us and say, actually, this work is planned to be completed in 2024, then we will adjust your grant period accordingly. So in essence, when you come to report to us at the end of your grant period, or whenever you've spent your money, we want to know when it's been spent. We want to be certain it's all been spent before you can then request any more. So it's difficult for me to say there isn't a sort of one size fits all timeline, because it depends what you want the money for. Sometimes we see capital projects which we give funding to, and they take much longer than anyone expected to be completed, in which case people come back to us and say, I'm so sorry, we're going to need another year. Then we'll be able to report to you on having spent the money. That's fine. We just extend the grant period, but obviously as the grant period extends, that means you won't be able to come back for additional funds during a live grant period. So I hope that answers the question.
Lovely. Around, can gifts in kind be considered as part of local fundraising?
I think it's always good to really tell us about gifts in kind. I think it's useful to know, because that, it could be a local business offering you something. I think absolutely everywhere that you have been able to galvanize more support, then absolutely you can let us know that. If you're presenting us with a budget, we wouldn't expect all of the income just to be in kind and then you hope for a cash contribution from us. We would be expecting to see in a budget. I know some people will sometimes add in kind support. We wouldn't expect that to be the only income that you have, as it were. It's not real income, but I think definitely tell us about it.
Okay, great. And then Adriana had a question about accounts. If they're submitting an application, for example, for November 2022, what accounting year would it fit into? To explain for around sort of, it's basically where you want the money to go in terms of the financial year. Does that make sense?
It does, although you broke up a bit, so I'm not sure I heard the full question, but I think the question is about your accounting periods and your application periods. To us, it doesn't matter particularly. I know for lots of fundraisers, they prefer to apply for funds that fall within their financial years, because it's just neater when you do your accounts. It doesn't matter to us whether if we to give you a grant, whether that straddles 2 financial years, 3 financial years. It's sort of a little bit in one financial year and the next one. So it's entirely up to you how you present it to us. What we need to know is what it is that you're going to do and how you propose to spend the money if you're successful. The period that you spend it in is not a concern to us.
Okay, I hope that helps, Adriana. Katia had a quick question around, do the accounts form part of the 10-page proposal limit? No, the accounts are added as a separate document, as a separate PDF document. So that's fine. That doesn't need, the accounts don't need to sit within the proposal application. Olivia,
Absolutely.
yeah. Olivia, would you prefer to be invited to visit an organisation before submitting an application if we are an unknown charity?
You're very welcome to invite us, but to be honest, it's very unlikely we would visit you or have a meeting with you until we have a live application in our hands. And that's simply because obviously there are lots and lots of charities out there. If we met all of them speculatively before they're ready to submit, we wouldn't get any grant making done. So what we tend to do is when we have an application in our hands and we've got some facts at our fingertips, and we have specific questions, then either we would pick up the phone and ask you, or email you, or potentially visit you. So there's no need to be, don't hold off to, see us physically in your building first before you make an application. Get the application in first, then we'll come back to you.
Thank you. Just another quick one from Katia. If a charity is working mostly outside the UK, can you apply for core costs?
No.
So the overall question is, No. So if we support core costs for UK charities, but not charities which work outside the UK, does this mean that a UK charity which works mostly outside the UK cannot apply for core costs? No.
I think the answer would be no, because you really need to be, we are interested in supporting people in the UK, supporting the voluntary sector in the UK and supporting the beneficiaries that are based in the UK. If you have your base core costs in this country, but the beneficiaries are outside the country, it wouldn't fit within our scope.
Cordelia, for a project grant, can this be for a single event that our organisation works year round to deliver, for example, a festival? I heard you earlier say that you don't fund one-off events. That's right, Cordelia. I'm afraid a festival or one-off event is outside of our scope. Ruth Russell, will the trustees always give a yes/no outcome, or might they part fund and ask, e.g., if we asked for 30k a year for 3 years and the trustees decide to award 20k for 1 year? Not sure I 100% understand that question, Ruth. We might have to.
I do. It's fine. The trustees make up their own mind about whether they want to support you or not, and they are not all or nothing funders. So they won't just look at what you've come and asked for and say, yes, we'll do that, or no, we won't. They might look at it, and they're hugely experienced grant makers. So they will look at it and go, well, actually, for that type of work, we tend to give, grants for around £10,000, for example. I mean, the place that I would recommend that you look, if you're not quite sure how to pitch it, we obviously publish all our grant making on 360 Giving. We also publish our annual reports, so you can see the types of organisations that we've supported and the kind of levels. We don't have a perfect formula because this isn't science. This is, it's very nuanced how trustees come to their final decision. But absolutely, it could be that you've asked us for, and some people do, £99,999.99, and the trustees go, well, actually, we love what you do, but we're going to give you £25,000 for it. So yes, it really is. And I think the other thing to say is you don't actually have to specify an amount that you're asking for. If you're asking for just a core, just a small organization looking for core costs, it could be that you just tell us what your income and expenditure is, tell us what you've raised to date and what your current shortfall is, and the trustees will take a view. They might just give you a contribution to that shortfall. So don't get too hung up about asking for a very specific amount if you don't want to. They can get that information from seeing what your shortfall is.
Lovely, thank you, Flora. So Helen was just asking about when you've only got draft accounts available, is that okay, or do you have to have previous years? I mean, I think you'd agree with me, Flora, that we would say that when you do have draft accounts still available, if possible to share with us, that's great. It's always great to have the latest account information, and we just obviously keep that confidentially for our eyes only.
Yeah, I mean, I think always, we need a signed set, because we need to know that you've absolutely, done a set of accounts. But
Yeah.
if, as Harriet said, if they're in draft form or you have year-end projections and you just want to give us the most up-to-date financial position, then absolutely you can share that information with us. And that is really, the example I gave about an organisation that is in extreme growth, it's really helpful to do that, because obviously if your older accounts are showing a turnover of £100,000, but actually in the subsequent years you've been growing, by another 100, another 100, another 100. It's good to show that trajectory, so we don't think, well, hold on, this organisation seems to be wildly ambitious about what it thinks it can and can afford to do.
Another slightly linked accounts question was, as a newly registered CIO, which was a CIC, would we need 1 year under our belt in order to submit accounts, or could we use the CIC accounts and share that picture?
So obviously, ideally, we like a year's worth of charity accounts to be able to look at. But if your CIC was doing exactly the same kind of work, so you can show a kind of almost identical sort of income and expenditure, it's just your governance has changed, then we would be prepared to look at those CIC accounts, because that would help build the picture. Really depends slightly what the situation is. If you've had a massive change in the way you do things and the way it might look financially, then you probably need to wait for your charitable accounts.
Quick question from Rachel. If the charity's income is over £1 million, can you still apply for the smaller grant programme if you want to, or would we need to apply for major?
No. You can apply for a smaller grant. And in fact, when people put in their major grant requests, sometimes we will look at those requests and go, actually, we think this is better suited to a regular grant. So some of the bespoke advice we give around major grants isn't always, yes, you want £500,000, we're definitely going to let you apply for £500,000. It sometimes is, I'm afraid we think for this level of work, we think you'd be better off asking for £50,000 in a regular grant. So we will give you that advice, but there's not a threshold of turnover that can or can't apply to either of those, to the regular grants programme.
There's also a question from Amy about accounts in relation to university, being the organisation is part of a university. Do you want to maybe just explain, Flora, the university application process?
So I slightly depends. I'm not quite sure what it means. Our organisation is part of a university. If you are a university, then you need to supply your accounts. Just a note about universities is that we will only accept one application from any university at a time. So our anticipation is that the university head, either development office or vice chancellor's office, will choose the priority project that represents that university. So if you're a department within a university, you have to be considered to be the university's priority project, have a letter of support from the vice chancellor in order to be able to apply. But I'm not sure if I'm answering that question because I don't know what an organisation part of a university means. Maybe we can.
We might have to take that one offline, possibly with Amy a bit afterwards. So I can share our details with the team to be able to. We've got quite a lot of questions stacking up here, so I'm just going to pull out some key ones. There was a comment about capital projects, a comment rather than question. You mentioned that for capital projects, you'd want an organisation to have already raised 50% of the total required. It'd be really helpful for a large funder like ourselves to commit to fund the project once 50% is raised instead. It'll be helpful for the organisation to raise funds from smaller funders. If you could say Garfield Weston has committed to fund once we have raised at least 50%. I think that's sort of a bit of a nuance there around how we talk about the funds that have already been raised as part of the income plan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm not sure whether it's a question that is answered or somebody making a comment.
Yeah, I think that one's more of a comment. So let's.
But in essence, in order for a capital project to succeed, we need to be sure that you've already made some significant inroads into fundraising from a whole range of sources, and it could be that you've been saving up for years because you know your roof's going to fall in, and you've can commit some reserves to it, or that there's some other ways of funding it. But as you can imagine, for capital projects, they're only able to go ahead with all the money. So that's why we ask people to be significantly advanced before they ask us for the money. Otherwise, we're spending time looking at something and won't be able to make a positive decision because we'll have to say, well, actually, you're not quite ready.
Thank you, Flora. So just looking through for some other ones that will be across the board. The situation around multi-year grants, can we clarify our position on multi-years?
So multi-year grants, you're eligible to apply for a multi-year grant, and obviously within the regular grant threshold, that would have to be up to 199,000 over 3 years. So roughly 30,000 a year for 3 years is the maximum you can fit within a regular grants program. You can obviously ask for less. You can have 10,000 a year for 3 years. The basis on which we will award it will depend on the strength of the case. So if you're an organisation that does the same things pretty much every year and you just need that stability, to help keep the lights on, help keep the staff paid, then you can absolutely ask us for a multi-year grant. What I think I said earlier is that if you're a first-time applicant to us, it may be that trustees decide just to give you 1 year in the first instance, just because they want to see how it goes, they want to see your report, they want to know that you'll use the money effectively. But you're welcome to ask for it. And again, as I said, trustees aren't all or nothing funders. If that's what you want, by all means ask for it. We might go, well, actually, let's just give them a year, see how it goes. And that will be the response you get. And then, of course, you can come back after that year is up and you can ask again. And you can ask again for a multi-year grant and you might be successful next time.
Thank you, Flora. If we could just quickly jump, I think, to Kirsten and Sarah, who've got their hands up while I look through some of the other ones. Kirsten, do you want to go first? Kirsten Busby.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, no worries. It was just a quick question. You mentioned earlier in the presentation that some regions you receive lots of applications from and some regions you receive fewer. And I wondered if you knew off the top of your head which regions you maybe receive some of the fewer applications from.
I lost the end of that question, but I think what you were asking about is regions. We do lots of analysis about where our grants go. I mean, you can see in our annual report where our grants have been spread across the UK, and we're always very attuned to where things are going. We don't necessarily publish. We don't go out and share all that information. It's really for us to think, well, actually, are there things we should be doing in certain areas? So absolutely, there are definitely. We're always looking at that. But I think the point that I wanted to make is some people think, well, I can't see in your accounts where you've ever really funded in this area. That's sometimes because we've never had any applications from that area. So I think the important thing is I don't want people to be put off because we sound like a big London-based funder. If you're operating in a small area at some point in the UK, don't be put off from applying to us. You're eligible to do so and should do so.
Thank you, Flora. There's one question around whether we have sort of expectations of sort of an ongoing active relationship with grantees, or is there more of a hands-off approach? And also, do we consider uplifts once there's been a grant made?
Okay, so relationships. I mean, obviously, everyone who's a good fundraiser knows that relationships are really important. We are a high volume grant maker. We get about 4,000 applications a year. We make about 2,000 grants. So we're not going to have a sort of relationship manager relationship with you, partly because a lot of the grants that we make are very straightforward. You need your roof fixed, we're giving you £5,000 or whatever to help with that. You do the job, you come back and tell us it's gone really successfully. That's all we probably need to know. And we treat our applicants, obviously as experts. We trust you with the family's funding. We expect you to be in touch if and when things go wrong, and sometimes things do go wrong. It's always much better to be upfront and transparent if something is going a bit wobbly that you thought was going to be fine. And that could be a whole range of things, but it's much better to pick up the phone and tell us. The worst thing that happens sometimes to us is that we find out in the press that something's gone wrong and we're a major funder of it and nobody told us in advance. So if timings are going wobbly or the project's found some difficulties, then just pick up the phone and let us know. We're not going to keep checking in with you. We have a simple reporting structure, which is you report at the end of your grant period, or if it's a multi-year grant, you report annually in order to be able to release your next tranche. There's some information about the top tips of what we see in a report, which are hopefully very, very straightforward, because we don't want you to spend lots of time reporting. We want you to spend lots of time doing good work. So we try and keep it really simple. I think the second question, totally unrelated, or maybe it's related, I don't know, is about uplifts. Do we offer uplifts during a grant period? I mean, again, it really depends. We look at everything on a bespoke basis. We're not, if, for example, your capital project has suddenly got unexpected costs and you're struggling to, finish off the campaign, again, this is about letting us know, write to us, say, this is the situation we find ourselves in, we're still £20,000 short or whatever. Is there any chance you might consider a bit of support? The trustees are very sort of flexible, hands-on funders, and respond to those kind of requests. They don't always respond positively. They might turn around and say, no, we're sorry, we are the largest funder already, we're not going to give you any more. Or they might say, yes, actually, you've done really well, but we can see you're struggling to get over the line, let's help you again. So it's a bespoke thing, depending on the application.
Thanks, Flora. Right, sorry, back to Sarah and then Caroline. Sarah, Lazar, do go.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope this is a quickish question. So I'm from St George's, Bristol, which is a venue in Bristol, and something we'd like to apply for, if possible, is an application to support core costs. And part of that is ticket sales are down much more significantly than we had projected they would be at this time, and we're projecting that for next year as well. Are you responding to those sorts of challenges that venues like ours are facing, where ticket income is significantly reduced, and we see that sort of carrying forward into next year. And just if I can add on a little second part to that question is, if we are able to make an application which covers that issue, are we able to approach you for a conversation before the application, and if so, what is the kind of timescale for that?
So in answer to your question, it's a difficult one because we're really aware that, you know, particularly for cultural venues, it has been really difficult to restart after the pandemic. And obviously, many of you might know we did a special one-off fund during the pandemic for the Western Culture Fund, very much to support organisations to reopen and restart with confidence. We know that that's still been a bit of a bumpy ride. However, we don't tend to do core costs for lots of arts organisations, just partly because we expect arts organisations to have access to a much bigger sort of mixed economy of income. And I know I appreciate that income is down in certain areas. So for us, I don't think it would be the most compelling request to come to us to sort of backfill where there is a shortage, i.e. ticket sales down, there's a gap and you'd like us to fill it. I think that's probably not the most compelling thing for the trustees to hear. It could be that you come to us for some other types of activity, and that would allow you to repurpose other funds in the organisation where there are gaps, for example, in reduced income. In terms of having a conversation, the thing about having conversations, and probably Harriet will smile at this, is that it's really helpful for us. We're very open to having conversations, but they need to be really specific. So we need you to be in a place where you've kind of thought about what it is you want to apply for, the kind of costs involved, a timeline, because we can respond to that. A lot of people would like to just have what I always think of as a coffee and a chat, just to talk about what they do and how they might go about making an application. Those are really difficult for us to have because they're just too wide and too speculative. You know, I mean, obviously lovely to have. I'm always really happy to sit and hear about all the wonderful work you all do, but as you can imagine, in the daytime, there is an awful lot of time to do that. So I think, of course, if you have once you've looked at the guidance, you have very specific questions about how you want to structure your application or concerns about how you might do that in the best possible way, then, you know, by all means, you know, be in touch for a conversation. But I think I would always caution against the kind of, can we just have a chat conversation? Because I don't think you get the best out of us then. I just don't think we're able to give you really helpful, bespoke advice.
No, thank you. That's really, really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Flora. And then maybe if we just quickly finish up with Caroline, and then we'll let you know about follow-up information. Oh, Caroline, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. It's quick. It's just multi-year request. Do you prefer or encourage or advise applying for the same amount times 3 or 2 years, or say a decreasing amount to show, you know, decreased dependence on that extra funding, for example, or increased if you're planning on growing, or does it not matter?
It's a really interesting question, and actually most people just sort of ask for a standard amount repeated over a period of years. But if your plans are specific enough for you to be able to demonstrate, you know, either reducing or increasing amount, then you're very welcome to ask for it. We have the system and capability to give you a different amount across those 2 or 3 years. So it's entirely up to you. On the whole, most people do a sort of rather straightforward, you know, can we have 10,000 a year for 3 years, and then show their budgets that relate to that. But it's a good question, you know, absolutely. If that's what suits you, then by all means ask for it that way.
Thank you. As in accounting for inflation, for example, that's useful.
Great. I think we might have to wrap up there for the moment, but we will be sending a follow-up email that I've given the team that has all helpful links and our guidelines, and also the contact information of our operations team if there's anything else that's burning that you need an answer to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure we got to everyone's questions today, but hopefully we got to as many as we possibly could do. So if there are any really desperate questions where you think I didn't get mine answered, then, you know, by all means be in touch, and we'll try and give you the information that you need.
Great, thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Flora. That was really insightful, and clearly everyone's got quite a lot to input for it. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. We're going to